does concern some international headlines. I do want to put up this live vantage point that we have outside of the White House, as we've been very closely looking at relationships between the U.S. and Iran, as well as Iran and Israel. Putting this up on your screen, this is from Barak Ravid with Axios, saying that President Trump is now moving closer to a major war with Iran. It could come sooner and be much bigger than most recognize, my sources tell me. He went on to talk about the story that is posted on Axios. And so, again, what we have now know here is that a U.S. military operation in Iran would likely be a massive weeks-long campaign that would look more like a full-fledged war than last month's pinpoint operation in Venezuela, according to Axios. So to talk a lot more about where we stand with some of these negotiations, the current relationship between the United States and Iran, I want to bring into the conversation Alex Traiman with JNS. Alex, thanks so much for being with us here on Live Now from Fox.
Christina, thanks so much for having me.
Well, we have to get into it. It's a pretty interesting headline there to read that Axios is reporting that President Trump may be moving closer to a major war with Iran. Can you sort of talk about the latest updates that we've been hearing and seeing there in the region? Specifically, we know that the United States and members of Iran's coalition had talks this week to discuss the nuclear capability of the country.
Sure. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi of Iran stating that the meeting between the United States and Iran was constructive, and that over the coming weeks, Iran might put together a draft of some of its proposals. And they're also looking for significant sanctions relief, but there are a number of U.S. sources reporting that the meeting between Iran and the United States was, quote, nothing more, was a nothing burger, and that Iran has not even acknowledged some of Trump's red lines in the negotiations, which include not just the nuclear capabilities, but also the ballistic missiles production and the sponsoring of regional proxies, as well as the murder of many Iranian protesters on the streets of the country over the past month.
And so I have to ask you, Alex, as we're talking about this, I also want to put up some video here on the screen, some images that show that meeting that we were just discussing that happened in Geneva. But when it comes to what actually happens there in the region, sources with Axios are saying that this would likely be a joint U.S.-Israeli campaign that's much broader in scope. Can you sort of speak to us now about the importance between the relationship and with the United States and Israel, and making sure that if they do make any moves there in the region, that those two countries are working together?
Oh, these countries are working very well together. I had a senior Israeli official tell me during the meeting between Netanyahu and Trump last week in the White House that on the one hand, Trump is forming the Board of Peace, but on the other side, there's a Board of War. And the two chairmen of the Board of War are President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. And that's why you have seen Netanyahu go to the White House approximately once a month, once every 6 weeks. The amount of coordination between Israel and the United States is extremely high. And we can look back to the June Operation Rising Lion that was launched by Israel. It was the 12-day war, and at the very end of that 12-day war, we saw the United States participate with the Operation Midnight Hammer, where President Trump set the B-2 bombers to destroy the underground Fordo nuclear facility. So the two worked very, very closely on that campaign, and at this point it is believed that while the United States could do it themselves, that there's a strong likelihood that Israel is prepared to do it as well.
I want to bring this up. We just carried in full the White House press briefing with Caroline Leavitt. And during that briefing, she says this: the president has always been clear with respect to Iran. Diplomacy always is his first option. Iran would be very wise to make a deal. President Trump is always thinking about what's in the best interest of the United States, and that's how he makes decisions with respect to military action. Not, of course, addressing whether or not they would move forward with any military action, but leaving it on the table here as well, but still say that diplomacy is an option. In this case, I have to ask you, Alex, what would that diplomacy look like at this point, being that these two nations have been in talks for quite some time?
Yeah, I do think that President Trump would hope to avoid military option if it was possible. But for that to happen, the Iranians would have to agree to complete transparency with regard to their nuclear program, that there would be no more nuclear enrichment, no capacity to enrich uranium, and that IAEA would be able to go in and inspect any site at any time without any warning, that Iran would not be able to develop, and there would be significant curbs on the amounts of ballistic missiles and the range of the ballistic missiles that they have, that there would have to be proof that Iran is not sending money to regional proxies like Hezbollah, Hamas, or the Houthis. These are all the red lines, and I think that President Trump actually also would like to see a regime change take place through negotiations where Ayatollah Khamenei may take an off-ramp and maybe join his friend from Syria, Bashar Assad, in Moscow or elsewhere. This was an off-ramp that President Trump also offered to Nicolas Maduro in Caracas, but he refused to take it. And then we saw just weeks later that President Trump issued the order for special forces to take Maduro out of Venezuela. But I don't see the Iranian people, I don't see the Iranian regime agreeing to President Trump's demands. I think that the timeline for negotiations to bear fruit is waning fast, and the likelihood is that if it does wane, that the president will opt for a military intervention.
And Alex, you've already alluded to this, but we did have this statement from this week from Iran's foreign minister saying that the two parties are working on that potential agreement, saying, quote, "We've reached an understanding on the main principles with the United States." But also we do know that this week, Vice President J.D. Vance told Fox News that the talks went well in some ways, but in other ways, it was very clear that the president had set some red lines that the Iranians are not willing to actually acknowledge and work through. And so you were just discussing some of that as well. When it comes to this, is there any last minute push that the Iranians are able to make? Do they have anything in their back pocket that might make the United States maybe change course, or just have a second thought about what there is to move forward and how to make this ultimately come to an end?
Well, President Trump tweeted back in 2020 that the Iranians have never won a war but have never lost a negotiation. They are extremely skilled negotiators. They are trying to drag out negotiations as long as possible because the longer that all of the U.S. military equipment, what President Trump calls the massive armada, sits in the Middle East, that costs billions of dollars a day. And Iran hopes that it would make it less likely for them to use it with every day that they're able to stall out the negotiations. The Iranians do have leverage in the negotiations here. We just saw a naval exercise between Iran, Russia, and China near the Straits of Hormuz, and parts of the straits closed for military exercises. You've already seen the price of oil go up about 4% in the last period, and there is a very strong likelihood that the price of oil could go up significantly, which would cause a rise in prices, not just for Americans, but around the world. Also, Iran threatens retaliation, direct retaliation on Israel, which is prepared for such scenarios, but also potential retaliations on other countries in the region, like Qatar, which was targeted after the 12-day war in Operation Midnight Hammer. The Iranians sent ballistic missiles to the Al Udeid base in Qatar, potentially Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates or other countries in the Middle East could suffer from Iranian retaliation. So that's something that Israel, the United States have to be prepared for, and it does factor into whether President Trump ultimately decides to pull the trigger on a military intervention.
All right, and it is still yet to be seen. I want to address one thing that you mentioned there at the beginning, the armada that President Trump talks a lot about. We do know that more than 150 U.S. military cargo flights have moved weapon systems and ammunitions there to the Middle East. As you said, it is costing a lot of money to keep that there. But just in the last 24 hours, it's being reported that another 50 fighter jets, F-35s, F-22s, and F-16s are headed to the region as well. You also mentioned Operation Midnight Hammer, which we had seen, of course, unfold a few months ago. Is that show of military power affecting how Iran is now thinking, with the United States continuing to send armadas, as President Trump has said, there to the region in case they do move militarily?
Well, I think the one thing that's different between President Trump and previous presidents, including Biden and Obama, in negotiations is that he recognizes the very powerful leverage of the United States, and he understands that the only way that you can actually get Iran to give in to the American demands is with an extremely credible military threat. Moving all of this military hardware to the region presents a very credible military threat, and that the United States pulled the trigger, one, on the Operation Midnight Hammer, demonstrated its willingness to bomb inside Iran, as well as to remove Maduro from Venezuela, should give the Ayatollahs and the Iranian regime there the clear signal that President Trump, when he says he will do something, that he very well can do it, and that America is not just a paper tiger. So, on the one hand, use the leverage in order to try to get a negotiated outcome. But if negotiations fall apart, which all indications right now are that the president is not satisfied with the pace of the negotiations and does not believe that the negotiations will succeed, that the strong likelihood is that the United States will give a green light to military intervention. And we just seen reports tonight, actually, that Israel has prepared its home front command and its emergency medical services to prepare for a large-scale war with Iran.
Absolutely, and that's all stuff that we're continuing to watch here on Live Now from Fox. We do appreciate Alex Traiman for joining us here with the Jewish News Syndicate. We know that you are on the ground there in Israel. I hope you continue to stay safe and check in with us as we learn more details about this possible impending major war, as Axios is reporting. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right, wanted to make sure we're able